The sound of metal scraping against hard desert earth made Vincent Steele rein in his horse just past sundown, the shadows stretching long across the Arizona Territory landscape near a cluster of cottonwood trees that marked the presence of water in this unforgiving land. He had been riding for 3 days straight from Santa Fe, carrying dispatches for the territorial marshal in Egar, and his weary bones ached for rest. What he saw in the fading golden light made him pause, his hand instinctively moving toward the revolver at his hip before he realized the figure kneeling in the dirt posed no threat. A woman, her dark hair falling loose from its pins, was digging a small hole with what looked like a wooden spoon, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs that carried on the evening breeze. Vincent dismounted quietly, leading his horse by the reins as he approached. The woman wore a traveling dress that had once been fine but now showed the dust and wear of hard miles, and her hands, pale and trembling, worked the earth with desperate determination. She did not notice him until his shadow fell across her, and she looked up with startled green eyes that were red from crying, her face streaked with tears and dirt. "I mean you no harm, madam," Vincent said quickly, removing his hat and holding it against his chest. "I heard you from the road and wanted to make sure you were all right. Are you in some kind of trouble?" The woman stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to trust him or run. She was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with delicate features that might have been beautiful if not for the exhaustion and grief etched into every line. Finally, she looked down at the small object clutched in her left hand, a thin gold band that caught the dying light. "I am burying my wedding ring," she said, her voice hoarse and raw. "I am burying the past with it." Vincent felt something shift in his chest at those words, spoken with such finality and pain. He glanced around the empty landscape, seeing no wagon, no horse, no sign of how this woman had come to be alone in the middle of nowhere with nothing but a ring and a broken heart. "That is quite a thing to bury," he said carefully. "May I ask what brought you out here to do it?" She laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in the quiet evening. "Because the man who gave it to me is dead, and I want to be rid of every reminder of the life I thought I would have. Because I walked away from everything I knew, and I want to start fresh without the weight of what was around my finger." Vincent crouched down beside her, his knees cracking slightly. He was 26 years old, a working cowboy who had spent the last 8 years moving cattle and taking odd jobs across New Mexico and Arizona. He had seen his share of heartbreak and tragedy in this hard country, but something about this woman's determination to literally bury her past struck him as both brave and heartbreaking. "Did he die recently?" he asked gently. "3 months ago," she replied, dropping the ring into the shallow hole. "Consumption took him slowly, and I nursed him until the end. We had been married for 2 years, and I thought I loved him. But after he died, when I went through his things, I found letters from another woman, letters that showed he had been keeping a mistress in Tucson for most of our marriage, letters that proved everything I believed about my life was a lie." She began pushing dirt over the ring with her hands, her movements frantic now. Vincent reached out and gently caught her wrist. "Let me help you," he said. He pulled a small folding shovel from his saddlebag and quickly finished covering the ring, packing the earth down firmly. When it was done, the woman sat back on her heels and wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving more dirt streaked across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "You must think me foolish, making such a dramatic gesture." "I think you are honest about what you need," Vincent replied. "That takes courage." He stood and offered her his hand. "My name is Vincent Steele. I am headed to Egar, about 15 miles east of here. Where are you bound?" She took his hand and rose, her legs unsteady beneath her. "Annalise Jamison," she said. "I was also going to Egar. I have a cousin there who said I could stay with her while I figure out what to do next. I left Tucson 4 days ago with a wagon and a driver, but the driver turned out to be a drunk. 2 days ago, he gambled away the wagon and horses in some roadside camp, then disappeared. I have been walking since yesterday morning. Vincent felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of someone abandoning a woman alone in this dangerous territory. You are lucky you were not killed by exposure or worse, he said. These roads are not safe for a woman traveling alone. Did you have any belongings with you? A trunk with my clothes and a few personal items, Annalise said. It is gone now, along with the wagon. All I have left is what I am wearing and about $12 in my pocket. She looked at him with those green eyes, and Vincent saw steel beneath the grief. But I would rather have nothing and be free than keep anything that ties me to that life. Vincent made a decision in that moment. My horse can carry 2 for 15 miles if we go slow. I will take you to Egar. You can tell me about your cousin on the way, and we will get you there safely. Annalise hesitated, clearly weighing the danger of trusting a stranger against the certainty of dying if she continued alone. Vincent waited patiently, understanding her caution. Finally, she nodded. All right, thank you, Mr. Steele. I am grateful for your kindness. He helped her mount his horse, then swung up behind her, keeping a respectful distance as they started down the road. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, brilliant and countless in a way they never were back east. Vincent felt the warmth of Annalise's body in front of him, smelled the dust and sweat and something floral beneath it all, and found himself wondering about the man who had been foolish enough to betray such a woman. What is your cousin's name? He asked after they had ridden in silence for a while. Margaret Fletcher, Annalise replied. She married a rancher named Thomas Fletcher about 5 years ago. They have a spread north of Egar. We grew up together in Philadelphia, but she moved west when she was 18, and I stayed behind. I should have come with her then. I might have avoided so much pain. Or you might have found different pain, Vincent said. The past is like that ring you buried. You cannot change it, only decide how much weight you give it going forward. Annalise turned her head slightly, and he caught her profile in the starlight. That is a philosophical observation for a cowboy, she said, and he heard the hint of a smile in her voice. Cowboys have a lot of time to think while riding, Vincent replied, especially when they are alone as much as I am. Are you always alone? She asked. Mostly, Vincent admitted. I have been moving around since I was 18, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. My parents died of cholera when I was 17, and my younger sister went to live with an aunt in St. Louis. I did not want to be a burden to anyone, so I headed west to make my own way. Do you ever regret it? Annalise's voice was soft in the darkness. Vincent considered the question as they plodded along the rutted road. Sometimes, he said honestly. There are nights when I am camped alone under the stars and I wish I had someone to share it with. But then I think about the freedom I have, the places I have seen, and I cannot imagine having lived any other way. Freedom, Annalise repeated. That is what I want now. The freedom to decide my own future without being defined by a dead man's betrayal. They rode on through the night, stopping once to let the horse drink from a small creek. Vincent shared his canteen with Annalise and gave her some jerky and hard biscuit from his pack. She ate gratefully, and they talked about small things, the beauty of the desert landscape, the rumors of Apache raids in the area, the growing town of Egar, and its hopes of becoming a railroad stop someday. By the time they reached Egar in the early hours before dawn, Vincent felt as though he had known Annalise Jamison for far longer than one night. There was something about the way she spoke, direct and unafraid, that drew him in. She asked questions about his life with genuine interest, and she shared stories of her childhood in Philadelphia, with a mixture of nostalgia and relief at having left it behind. The Fletcher Ranch was another 5 miles north of town, but Vincent insisted on taking Annalise all the way there despite his exhaustion. When they arrived, as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold, a woman came running out of the ranch house, her face lit with joy. Annalise, thank God! Margaret Fletcher was a sturdy, practical-looking woman with brown hair and a sun-weathered face. She pulled Annalise down from the horse and embraced her tightly. Your letter said you would be here a week ago. I have been worried sick. Annalise explained what had happened with the wagon driver, and Margaret's face darkened with anger. That scoundrel! If I ever see him, I will tan his hide myself. She turned to Vincent, her expression softening. And you must be the good Samaritan who rescued her. Please, come inside. You look exhausted. Let me fix you breakfast and give you a place to rest. Vincent wanted to protest, to say he needed to deliver his dispatches and be on his way, but the truth was he was bone-tired, and the thought of a hot meal and a real bed was too tempting to refuse. Just for a few hours, he said. Then I need to get into town. Margaret would hear none of it. She insisted he stay for the day and rest properly. And her husband Thomas, a quiet man with kind eyes, took Vincent's horse to the barn and promised to give it a good rub down and feed. Inside the comfortable ranch house, Margaret bustled around preparing eggs and bacon and fresh bread, while Annalise washed her face and hands and changed into a clean dress that Margaret provided. When they sat down to eat, Vincent found himself across the table from Annalise, and their eyes met with a shared moment of connection that made his heart beat faster. She looked different now, cleaned up and in fresh clothes, the grief still present in her eyes but tempered by something that might have been hope. After breakfast, Margaret showed Vincent to a small guest room, and he fell asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. He dreamed of green eyes and gold rings buried in the desert earth, of wide-open spaces and the sound of a woman's laughter carried on the wind. When he woke in the late afternoon, the sun streaming through the window, Vincent found the house quiet. He washed up with the pitcher and basin provided, then made his way outside. He found Annalise sitting on the porch, watching the cattle graze in the distance. She turned when she heard his footsteps and smiled. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. "Better than I have in months," Vincent admitted, settling into the chair beside her. "Your cousin is very kind." "She always has been," Annalise said. "When I wrote to her about David's death and what I discovered, she immediately wrote back and told me to come here. She said I could stay as long as I needed, that there was always room for family." "David was your husband?" Vincent asked. "Yes, David Jamison. He was a banker's son, very respectable, very proper. Our families approved the match, and I thought I was lucky to have him." Her voice was flat, emotionless now. "I thought I knew what love was supposed to feel like. But looking back, I realize I never felt with him what I read about in books, that sense of connection and passion. It was comfortable, safe, and it turned out even that was an illusion." Vincent looked at her profile, the way the afternoon light caught in her dark hair. "Maybe you just have not met the right person yet," he said quietly. Annalise turned to face him, and something sparked in her eyes. "Maybe I have not," she said. "Or maybe I have just started to." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Vincent felt it like a physical force, this attraction that had been building since he first saw her bearing her ring. He wanted to reach out and take her hand, but he held back, unsure if it was too soon, if she was ready. Margaret came out onto the porch then, breaking the spell. "Vincent, Thomas says you mentioned you have dispatches to deliver in town. If you are heading that way, would you mind terribly taking our supply list to the general store? We need some things, and it would save me a trip tomorrow." Vincent stood, grateful for something to do with the restless energy suddenly coursing through him. "Of course, madam. I would be happy to." "I could go with you," Annalise said suddenly, standing as well. "I mean, if you do not mind the company. I should probably see the town, learn my way around if I am going to be staying here for a while." Vincent tried to keep the pleasure off his face. "I would welcome the company," he said. They rode together into Egar on Vincent's rested horse, the late afternoon sun warm on their backs. The town was small but growing, with a main street that boasted a general store, a saloon, a church, a doctor's office, and a handful of other businesses. People on the street nodded to them as they passed, curious about the newcomers. Vincent delivered his dispatches to the marshal's office first, a weathered building at the end of the main street, Marshall Dawson, a grizzled man in his 50s with an impressive mustache, took the sealed letters and nodded his thanks. You staying in the area, Steele? The marshal asked. We could use a good man. I have been short a deputy since Bill Carson took off for the goldfields last month. Vincent glanced at Annalise, who was examining a wanted poster on the wall with apparent interest. I had not planned on it, he said slowly, but I might reconsider. What would the job entail? Keeping the peace, mainly, Dawson replied. Breaking up fights at the saloon, making sure the ranchers and the farmers do not kill each other over water rights, tracking down the occasional horse thief. It pays $40 a month, plus a room above the jail. Nothing glamorous, but it is steady work. $40 a month was good money, better than most cowboy work, and it would mean staying in Egar near Annalise. Vincent found himself nodding before he had fully thought it through. Let me think on it overnight, he said. I will give you an answer tomorrow. Fair enough, Dawson said. Come by in the morning if you decide you want it. At the general store, Vincent gave the shopkeeper Margaret's list while Annalise wandered the aisles, examining the goods with interest. He watched her trail her fingers over bolts of fabric, smile at a display of ribbons, and carefully study a set of hair combs behind the counter. When she caught him watching, she blushed slightly and came to stand beside him. I am not used to having nothing, she admitted quietly. When I left Tucson, I had 3 trunks full of dresses and shoes, and all the things a respectable widow should have. Now I have 1 borrowed dress and a few dollars to my name. It is strange how freeing it feels. The shopkeeper, a thin man named Henderson, finished gathering Margaret's order and tallied up the cost. As Vincent paid, he noticed Annalise looking wistfully at the hair combs again. On impulse, he asked Henderson to add them to the order. Oh no, Annalise protested when she realized what he was doing. You cannot buy me things. It would not be proper. Consider it a thank you for the company on the ride into town, Vincent said, taking the wrapped combs from Henderson and pressing them into her hands. Besides, they are just combs. Hardly a scandalous gift. Annalise looked down at the package, then up at him, and the gratitude in her eyes made the small expense worthwhile. Thank you, she said softly. You have been kinder to me in 2 days than most people were in my entire marriage. They rode back to the Fletcher Ranch as the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. Annalise told Vincent about her life in Philadelphia, about the rigid social expectations and the endless rounds of parties and calls that had filled her days. She talked about her parents, both dead now, and her older brother, who had inherited the family business and barely acknowledged her existence once she married. Vincent shared his own stories about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about the hard early years after his parents died, when he had worked any job he could find just to eat. He told her about the places he had been, the people he had met, the beautiful and terrible things he had seen in 8 years of wandering. By the time they arrived back at the ranch, the easy conversation between them had deepened into something more profound. Vincent helped Annalise down from the horse, and when his hands circled her waist, neither of them moved away immediately. They stood close in the gathering darkness, and Vincent could feel her breath on his face. I should not feel this way so soon, Annalise whispered. David has only been dead 3 months. People would say I am being disrespectful, that I am not mourning properly. Do you care what people would say? Vincent asked, his hands still at her waist. No, Annalise said, sounding surprised at her own answer. I do not. I spent my whole life caring what people thought, doing what was expected, and where did it get me? Married to a liar and alone in the world. If I learned anything from David's betrayal, it is that I should trust my own feelings, follow my own heart. And what is your heart telling you now? Vincent's voice was barely audible. Annalise reached up and touched his face, her fingers light against his jaw. That you are a good man, that I feel safer with you than I ever did with David, that something about you makes me want to take a risk again, even though I swore I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me. Vincent turned his head and kissed her palm, a gentle gesture that made Annalise's breath catch. I would never hurt you, he said. I know it is too soon for promises, and I know you need time, but I want you to know that I am staying in Agar. The marshal offered me a deputy job, and I am going to take it. So I will be around, if you want me to be. I want you to be, Annalise said, and then she stood on her toes and kissed him, a brief, soft press of lips that sent electricity through Vincent's entire body. When they pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Margaret's voice called from the house. Supper is ready. They laughed, the tension breaking, and walked together toward the welcoming light spilling from the windows. Over the next few weeks, Vincent settled into his new role as deputy marshal, while Annalise made a place for herself at the Fletcher Ranch. She helped Margaret with the household work, learned to bake bread and churn butter, and slowly began to rebuild her sense of self. Vincent visited the ranch whenever his duties allowed, and each visit deepened the bond between them. They took long walks together in the evening, talking about everything and nothing. Vincent taught Annalise to ride properly, not the side saddle ladies style she had learned in Philadelphia, but the practical working style of ranch women. She proved to be a quick learner, fearless and determined, and Vincent loved watching her gain confidence in the saddle. Annalise began to smile more, the haunted look fading from her eyes as the weeks passed. She told Vincent stories about her marriage that revealed not just David's betrayal, but the slow suffocation she had felt in that life. She had wanted to work, to have some purpose beyond being a decoration in David's household, but he had forbidden it. She had wanted children, but David had always put it off, saying they had plenty of time. Now she understood he had never intended to truly build a life with her. I feel like I wasted 2 years of my life, she told Vincent one evening as they sat by the creek that ran through the Fletcher property. 2 years I will never get back, living a lie. Vincent picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. You did not waste them, he said. You learned what you do not want. That is valuable knowledge. And if you had not married David, you would not have ended up in Tucson, would not have headed to Egar, and I would not have found you burying your ring that night. So maybe those 2 years were just the road that led you here. Annalise leaned her head on his shoulder. You always know the right thing to say. Not always, Vincent admitted, but I try. As summer deepened into fall, their relationship became the subject of gentle teasing from Margaret and Thomas, who clearly approved of the match. Marshal Dawson, too, had noticed his deputy's frequent trips north and made knowing comments about young love. Vincent did not mind. He was happier than he could remember being, and he thought Annalise felt the same. One afternoon in late September, Vincent arrived at the ranch to find Annalise in the barn, helping Thomas mend a section of fence. She had adapted well to ranch life, her hands no longer soft and her skin tanned from hours in the sun. She wore a simple cotton dress and her hair in a practical braid, and Vincent thought she had never looked more beautiful. I need to talk to you, he said, and something in his tone made Annalise set down her tools and follow him outside. They walked to their favorite spot by the creek, and Vincent felt nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. He had been thinking about this for weeks, planning what he would say, but now that the moment was here, all his carefully rehearsed words fled. Annalise, he began, then stopped. She waited patiently, her green eyes curious. I know it has only been a few months since we met. I know people will say it is too fast, that you are still a widow and should wait longer. But I also know what I feel, and I know what I want for my future. Annalise's expression shifted, becoming guarded. Vincent, what are you saying? He took her hands in his. I am saying that I love you. I have loved you since that first night when I saw you bearing your ring and declaring your intention to start fresh. I love your courage and your honesty and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love how you have embraced this new life out here, how you are not afraid to get your hands dirty or try new things. I love everything about you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you what real love looks like. Tears welled in Annalise's eyes. I love you too, she whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. After David, I thought I would never trust anyone again, never want to risk my heart. But you make me brave. You make me want to believe in love again. Vincent pulled a small box from his pocket. I know you buried your last wedding ring, and I respect that. This is not meant to replace it or make you forget. This is something new, a beginning instead of an ending. Annalise Jamison, will you marry me? He opened the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone, the traditional stone of the Southwest. Annalise looked at it and began to cry in earnest, but she was smiling through her tears. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Vincent Steele. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly, deeply, with all the passion and love he had been holding back for months. Annalise kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers tangling in his hair, and they lost themselves in each other until they were both breathless and laughing. They were married in the small church in Egar on a crisp October morning, with Margaret and Thomas as witnesses, and half the town in attendance. Annalise wore a new dress that Margaret had helped her sew, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. She had tucked a wildflower into her hair, and she had never looked more radiant. Vincent wore his best suit, brushed clean of trail dust, and he could not stop smiling as he waited for her to walk down the aisle. The ceremony was brief and heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vincent kissed his new bride to applause and cheers from the congregation. They emerged from the church into the bright autumn sunlight as Mr. and Mrs. Steele, ready to begin their new life together. Marshall Dawson had given Vincent 3 days off for a honeymoon, and they spent it at a small cabin in the mountains that belonged to Thomas Fletcher's brother. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace and a view of the aspen trees turning gold in the fall air. They spent their days hiking and talking and learning each other in new and intimate ways, and their nights wrapped in each other's arms before the fire. On their last evening at the cabin, as they sat together watching the sunset paint the sky, Annalise said, I never thought I could be this happy. 5 months ago, I was burying my wedding ring and thinking my life was over. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, and I feel like my life is just beginning. Vincent kissed her temple. I felt the same way when I found you that night, like I had been waiting for something without knowing what it was, and suddenly there you were, brave and broken and beautiful, and I knew you were what I had been searching for. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you had not been riding that road that particular evening? Annalise asked. If you had stopped to camp somewhere else, or if I had buried the ring earlier? All the time, Vincent admitted. But I also think some things are meant to be. Maybe we were both wandering, looking for each other without knowing it, and fate or God or plain luck brought us together at exactly the right moment. I like that thought, Annalise said, snuggling closer to him, that even in the worst moment of my life, something good was waiting just around the corner. When they returned to Egar, they moved into a small house on the edge of town that the marshal had helped them find. It needed work, but they threw themselves into making it a home with enthusiasm. Annalise painted the walls and sewed curtains, while Vincent repaired the roof and built new steps for the porch. Margaret donated some furniture, and other townspeople contributed dishes and linens and other household items as wedding gifts. By the time winter arrived, the house was cozy and comfortable, a place that reflected both of them. Annalise had started a small business doing fine sewing and alterations for the women of Egar, using the skills she had learned as a young lady in Philadelphia. The money was not much, but she took pride in earning it herself and contributing to their household. Vincent continued his work as deputy marshal, handling the everyday problems that arose in a frontier town. It was occasionally dangerous, but mostly routine, and he liked being part of a community in a way he had never been during his wandering years. He liked having a home to come back to, a wife who greeted him with a smile and a kiss, a life that was stable and good. Their first Christmas together was simple but joyful. They attended services at the church, had dinner with Margaret and Thomas, and exchanged modest gifts. Vincent gave Annalise a beautiful shawl he had ordered from Santa Fe, and she gave him a pair of leather gloves she had made herself, tooled with his initials. They spent Christmas night in their own home, sitting before the fire, talking about their plans for the future. "I want children," Annalise said, her head resting on Vincent's chest. "Lots of them, if we are blessed. I want to fill this house with laughter and love and all the things I dreamed about when I was younger." "I want that too," Vincent said, running his fingers through her hair. "I want to give our children the kind of childhood I had before my parents died. Stable and loving and full of possibilities." "How many do you think?" Annalise asked, smiling up at him. Vincent pretended to consider. 6, 8, a dozen? Annalise laughed and swatted his arm. "Let us start with one and see how we manage." As it turned out, they did not have long to wait. In early spring, Annalise realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent over breakfast one morning, her face glowing with excitement and a touch of nervousness. Vincent whooped with joy, picked her up, and spun her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "Careful," she protested. "You will make me sick." "Sorry," Vincent said, setting her down gently and then dropping to his knees to press his ear against her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Annalise stroked his hair, her eyes soft with love. "You're going to be a wonderful father. And you are going to be an amazing mother," Vincent replied, standing and kissing her soundly. The pregnancy was not easy. Annalise suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months, and Vincent would hold her hair and bring her cool cloths and feel helpless in the face of her misery. But she never complained, and as the sickness faded and her belly began to round, she bloomed with health and happiness. Margaret was thrilled to be an honorary aunt and insisted on helping prepare for the baby. She brought over tiny clothes she had saved from her own children, helped Annalise set up a cradle in the corner of the bedroom, and shared all her knowledge about childbirth and infant care. Vincent listened to all of it with a mixture of awe and terror, suddenly aware of how much he did not know about babies. "You will figure it out," Margaret assured him when she caught him looking panicked during a discussion of diaper changes. "No one knows what they are doing with their first child. You just do your best and hope they survive long enough to grow up." "That is not reassuring," Vincent muttered, but Margaret just laughed. The baby came in November during the first cold snap of the season. Annalise's labor started in the middle of the night, and Vincent woke to her gripping his arm, her face tense with pain. "It is time," she said, and Vincent nearly fell out of bed in his haste to get dressed and fetch the doctor. The next 12 hours were the longest of Vincent's life. He paced the front room while the doctor and Margaret attended Annalise in the bedroom, helpless and terrified every time he heard her cry out. Thomas sat with him for a while, offering quiet words of encouragement, but eventually had to return to the ranch. Vincent continued his vigil alone, praying to a God he was not entirely sure he believed in, that both Annalise and the baby would come through safely. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound, the thin, outraged wail of a newborn. A moment later, the bedroom door opened and Margaret appeared, tired but smiling. "You have a son," she said, "and Annalise is doing fine. Come meet your boy." Vincent's legs felt weak as he walked into the bedroom. Annalise was propped up in bed, looking exhausted and pale but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. Vincent approached slowly, hardly daring to breathe, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby was red-faced and squalling, with a shock of dark hair and eyes squeezed tightly shut. He was the most beautiful thing Vincent had ever seen. "What do you think?" Annalise asked softly. Vincent could not speak around the lump in his throat. He reached out one finger and touched his son's tiny hand, and the baby's fingers immediately closed around it with surprising strength. Something broke open in Vincent's chest, a feeling so powerful and overwhelming he had no words for it. He is perfect, Vincent finally managed. You are perfect. I cannot believe we made something so incredible. What should we name him? Annalise asked. We talked about so many options but never decided. Vincent looked at his wife and child, his family, and thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. What about Clay? After the earth you buried your ring in, the ground where our life together really began. Annalise's eyes filled with tears. Clay, she repeated. Clay Steele. I love it. It is perfect. Margaret and the doctor left after making sure both mother and baby were settled, and Vincent climbed carefully into bed beside his wife and child. They spent the rest of the evening like that, the three of them together, marveling at Clay's tiny fingers and toes, laughing when he made funny faces, and falling more in love with each passing moment. I never knew I could feel like this, Annalise whispered as Clay nursed contentedly at her breast. Like my heart is so full it might burst. I know exactly what you mean, Vincent said, his arm around her shoulders. This is what life is supposed to be. This is what I was searching for all those years I was wandering. The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Clay was a colicky baby who did not sleep well, and there were many nights when Vincent and Annalise took turns walking him around the house, trying to soothe his cries. But there were also magical moments. Clay's first smile directed at his father, the first time he laughed at one of Vincent's silly faces, the day he rolled over on his own and looked surprised at his own accomplishment. Vincent discovered that fatherhood suited him. He loved everything about his son, from his baby smell to his gummy smiles to the way he calmed immediately when Vincent held him. He would come home from his deputy duties and scoop Clay up, talking to him about his day as if the infant could understand every word. Annalise would watch them together, her heart full, grateful every day for the life they had built. When Clay was 6 months old, Annalise discovered she was pregnant again. Vincent was delighted, though Annalise was a bit overwhelmed at the thought of having two babies so close in age. But she embraced it, as she had learned to embrace everything in this new life with determination and grace. Their daughter was born in the summer, an easier birth than Clay had been. She came into the world quietly, with big eyes that seemed to take everything in, and they named her Rose after Annalise's mother. Clay, now a toddler who was just learning to walk, was fascinated by his little sister and wanted to help with everything. The house felt full now, in the best possible way. There was always noise and activity, babies crying, Clay's excited babbling as he learned to talk, the daily rhythms of meals and naps and playtime. Vincent added on a second bedroom to accommodate their growing family, working on it in his spare time with help from Thomas and some of the other men in town. Annalise juggled motherhood and her sewing business, often working with Rose in a sling at her breast and Clay playing at her feet. She was tired most of the time, but she glowed with contentment. This was the life she had dreamed of when she was younger, before reality and a bad marriage had dimmed those dreams. Now she had it all: a husband who loved her, children who filled her days with purpose, and a sense of belonging she had never felt in her old life. On their second wedding anniversary, Vincent arranged for Margaret to watch the children so he could take Annalise out for a special dinner at the hotel restaurant in Egar. Annalise dressed in her best gown, and Vincent wore his suit, and they felt almost like the young couple who had married 2 years before, unburdened by sleepless nights and dirty diapers. Over dinner, Vincent took Annalise's hand across the table. The turquoise ring on her finger had become a part of her, as familiar and essential as breathing. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Marrying me so quickly, taking on this life?" Annalise looked at him incredulously. "Regret it? Vincent, these have been the best 2 years of my life. Every single day I wake up grateful that I met you, that I was brave enough to trust you, that I buried that old ring and everything it represented. You and our children are my whole world. Even when Clay is screaming at 3 in the morning and Rose has a dirty diaper and you have not slept in 3 days?" Vincent teased. Even then, Annalise said firmly, because those are real problems, honest problems, not like the fake perfect life I had with David, where everything looked fine on the surface but was rotten underneath. This life is hard sometimes, but it is real, and I would rather have one day of this than a lifetime of that other existence. Vincent raised his glass. To real life, then, and to many more years of it together. They clinked glasses and drank, and the love in their eyes needed no words. The years passed quickly after that. Clay grew into a sturdy, adventurous boy who followed his father everywhere, begging to help with Vincent's deputy duties. Rose was quieter, more thoughtful, with her mother's green eyes and a talent for drawing that emerged early. Annalise gave birth to two more children, another son they named Thomas after Margaret's husband, and a daughter they called Charlotte. Vincent eventually became the marshal when Dawson retired, a position of respect in the growing town of Egar. The railroad finally came through, bringing prosperity and new residents. The Steele family became one of the pillars of the community, known for their kindness and integrity. Annalise's sewing business grew as well. She took on an apprentice, a young widow who reminded her of herself and taught the woman not just how to sew, but how to rebuild a life after loss. She never spoke much about her first marriage, but those who knew her story understood that she was living proof that the past did not have to define the future. On quiet evenings, when the children were finally asleep and the house was peaceful, Vincent and Annalise would sit together on their porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Arizona sky. Sometimes they would talk about their day, sharing stories and making plans. Sometimes they would simply sit in comfortable silence, hands clasped, content in each other's presence. "Do you ever think about that night I found you?" Vincent asked one evening, 10 years into their marriage. Annalise smiled. "All the time. I think about how lost I was, how certain that my life was over. And then you appeared, like something out of a dream, this kind stranger who saw me at my worst and still thought I was worth saving." "You saved yourself," Vincent corrected. "You made the choice to leave, to bury that ring, to start over. I just happened to be there to give you a ride." "You were more than that," Annalise said. "You were hope when I had none. You were proof that good men existed, that real love was possible. You changed everything for me." Vincent pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "We changed everything for each other. I was just drifting before I met you. No purpose, no direction. You gave me a reason to stop moving and start living." They sat like that as the night deepened, two people who had found each other in the vastness of the frontier and built something lasting. Inside the house, their children slept safely, unaware of the journey their parents had taken to create this life. But someday, when they were older, Vincent and Annalise would tell them the story of how they met, and the children would understand that love could bloom even in the hardest soil, that new beginnings were always possible, and that sometimes you had to bury the past before you could embrace the future. As the years continued to unfold, the Steele family became legendary in their own small way in Egar. Vincent's reputation as a fair and honest marshal spread throughout the territory, and he was often called upon to help resolve disputes in neighboring towns. He took pride in his work, in the knowledge that he was making their corner of the world a little safer, a little more just. Annalise became known for her generosity, always the first to help when a family fell on hard times, to sit with the sick, to welcome newcomers to town. She never forgot what it felt like to be alone and frightened, to need help and have nowhere to turn. She made sure no one in Egar ever felt that way if she could help it. Their children grew into remarkable adults. Clay became a rancher, taking over a spread near the Fletcher place when Thomas and Margaret retired. He married a schoolteacher named Emma, and they gave Vincent and Annalise their first grandchildren. Rose surprised everyone by going to college in California, studying art, and eventually returning to open a gallery in Tucson. Thomas Jr. followed in his father's footsteps and became a deputy, then eventually a marshal in his own right. Charlotte married a doctor and stayed in Egar, raising her own family just down the street from her parents. Vincent and Annalise watched their children launch into their own lives with pride and a touch of melancholy. The house that had once been so full of noise and activity grew quiet again, but it was a peaceful quiet, not an empty one. They filled their days with grandchildren who came to visit, with community activities, with the simple pleasure of each other's company. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party at the church hall. It seemed like half the town showed up to celebrate the couple who had become synonymous with lasting love and commitment. There were speeches and toasts, and Vincent and Annalise danced together to a fiddle band, moving around the floor with the easy grace of long familiarity. 25 years, Annalise marveled as they danced. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday I was burying that ring, and sometimes it feels like that was a different lifetime entirely. It was a different lifetime, Vincent said. That was the end of one life and the beginning of another, and what a beginning it has been. Later, when they were alone at home, Annalise brought out a small box she had been hiding. Inside was a faded photograph she had found in her things, one of the few items that had survived the loss of her trunk all those years ago. It showed her and David on their wedding day, both of them young and stiff in their formal clothes, looking more like strangers than lovers. I found this last week, she said, handing it to Vincent. I had forgotten I even had it. Look at me, I look terrified. Vincent studied the photograph. You look like someone playing a part, he observed. Nothing like the woman I married. Annalise took the photograph back and looked at it for a long moment. Then, decisively, she walked to the fireplace and tossed it into the flames. They watched together as it curled and blackened and turned to ash. I do not need that anymore, Annalise said. I have not needed it for a long time. The only past I want to remember is the one that started the night you found me. Vincent wrapped his arms around her from behind, and they stood watching the fire together. That is the only past worth remembering, he agreed. Their life together continued to be full and rich. They traveled occasionally, taking a trip to San Francisco to visit Rose, going to St. Louis to finally meet Vincent's sister and her family. But they always came back to Egar, to the home they had built together, to the community they loved. When Vincent turned 55, he decided to retire from his marshal duties. He wanted to spend more time with Annalise, to travel more, to enjoy their grandchildren while they were still young enough to keep up with them. The town threw him a retirement party, and the mayor made a speech about Vincent's years of service and dedication. In his response, Vincent surprised everyone by pulling Annalise up beside him. I cannot take credit for anything I have accomplished without acknowledging this woman, he said. When I met her 28 years ago, I was a drifter with no real purpose. She gave me a reason to stop moving and start building. Every good thing in my life started the night I found her in the desert, and I thank God every day that I was on that road at that exact moment. There was not a dry eye in the room when he kissed her, and the applause was thunderous. They spent Vincent's retirement years traveling when they wanted, staying home when they preferred, and being thoroughly involved in their grandchildren's lives. They took long rides together, just the two of them, revisiting old haunts and making new memories. They went back once to the spot where Vincent had found Annalise burying her ring, though it took some searching to locate the exact place after so many years. Strange to think this was where it all began, Annalise said, standing in the shadow of the same cottonwood trees, now older and larger. I was so lost that night, so certain my life was over. And I was so certain I would be alone forever, Vincent added. Funny how wrong we both were. They stood together in that spot, remembering, then turned and rode back toward home, toward the life they had built from that desperate moment of burial and release. As they entered their 60s, health became more of a concern. Vincent developed arthritis that made riding difficult, and Annalise had a bout of pneumonia that scared them both. But they recovered, determined to have many more years together, and adjusted their activities to accommodate their aging bodies. Their children worried about them living alone, suggested they might want to move in with one of them, but Vincent and Annalise refused. "We are fine in our own home," Annalise insisted. "We will ask for help when we need it, but we are not invalids yet." They remained active in the community, attending church, participating in town events, hosting family dinners. Their home was still the center of the family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays and celebrations. It was a home filled with love and laughter and the evidence of a well-lived life. On their 40th anniversary, their entire family gathered for a celebration at Clay's ranch. Children and grandchildren came from all over, and there were now great-grandchildren toddling around as well. Vincent looked at the crowd of people, all of them connected to him and Annalise, all of them the result of that one night 40 years ago when he had heard the sound of someone digging in the desert. In his speech at the dinner, Clay told the story of his parents' meeting, a story that had become family legend. "Our father found our mother at her lowest point," he said. "And instead of taking advantage or walking away, he offered kindness and help with no expectation of anything in return. That is who my father is. That is who my mother is too. She could have let her past define her, could have let bitterness and grief rule her life. Instead, she chose hope and courage and built something beautiful." Rose added her own thoughts, her artist's perspective, making the story almost poetic. They teach us that it is never too late for a new beginning, that the past does not have to dictate the future, and that real love is patient and kind and enduring. Vincent and Annalise listened to their children's words with tears streaming down their faces, overwhelmed by the evidence of the life they had created together. When it was their turn to speak, they stood together, holding hands as they always did. "We do not have much to say that has not already been said," Vincent began, "except thank you. Thank you to our children for being exactly who you are, for making us proud every single day. Thank you to our grandchildren and great-grandchildren for bringing such joy into our lives. And thank you to this community that took us in and let us build our life here." Annalise squeezed his hand and added, 40 years ago, I buried a ring and thought I was burying my chance at happiness. But what I was really burying was a life that was not meant for me. And in its place, I found a life beyond anything I could have imagined. I found a man who showed me what real love looks like, who has been my partner and best friend through everything. I found a family and a home and a purpose. I found myself, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. They kissed to enthusiastic applause, and the party continued late into the night with music and dancing and storytelling. Vincent and Annalise sat together watching it all, marveling at the beautiful chaos they had created, the legacy of love they were leaving behind. As they grew older still, they slowed down inevitably, but remained devoted to each other. They could no longer ride or travel much, but they still took walks together every evening that the weather permitted, moving slowly down the familiar streets of Egar, greeting neighbors and friends. They spent their days reading together, working on small projects, enjoying visits from family. Vincent's health declined first. A series of small strokes left him weakened, and though his mind remained sharp, his body no longer cooperated the way it once had. Annalise cared for him with the same determination she had shown in everything else, refusing to let their children take over, insisting that she was perfectly capable of looking after her husband. "You took care of your first husband until the end," Vincent said one day, as she helped him settle into his chair. "You should not have to do this again." "David was my duty," Annalise said firmly. "You are my love. There is no place I would rather be than by your side." They spent Vincent's final years in quiet contentment. He told her stories from his youth that he had never shared before, and she told him things about her childhood in Philadelphia that she had long forgotten. They reminisced about their life together, laughing over memories of their children's antics, marveling at how quickly the years had passed. One evening in early spring, as they sat together watching the sunset from their porch, Vincent took Annalise's hand and said, "I need you to know something, in case I do not get another chance to say it. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. Every single day with you has been a gift. I have no regrets, no wishes for things to be different. You gave me a life worth living, and I am grateful for every moment." Annalise could not speak around the tears clogging her throat, so she just held his hand tighter and nodded. They sat like that until the stars came out. Two old people who had loved each other for more than 45 years, facing the inevitable end with the same courage they had faced everything else. Vincent passed away peacefully in his sleep a few weeks later, with Annalise at his side. He was 71 years old, and he died as he had lived, with dignity and grace. The town of Agar mourned him, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the decades. Annalise stood at his grave, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, drawing strength from their presence. She placed a single wildflower on his casket, the same kind she had worn in her hair at their wedding, and said a silent goodbye to the man who had saved her life in more ways than one. The weeks and months after Vincent's death were difficult. Annalise felt his absence like a physical ache, reaching for him in the night and finding only empty space. But she did not fall apart. She had learned long ago that she was stronger than she thought, and she drew on that strength now. She continued to live in their home, surrounded by memories. She stayed active in the community, continued her sewing and volunteer work, spent time with family. But in quiet moments, she would take out a small box she kept in her dresser and look at the turquoise ring Vincent had given her so many years ago. She had taken it off only once in 45 years when it needed to be resized, and looking at it now brought both comfort and pain. One afternoon, about a year after Vincent's death, Annalise's daughter Charlotte found her in the bedroom, holding the ring and crying. "Oh, Mama," Charlotte said, sitting beside her and putting an arm around her shoulders. "I know you miss him terribly." "Every single day," Annalise admitted. "But these are not entirely sad tears. I am crying because I am so grateful I had him, even if it was not long enough. I am crying because I was loved so completely by such a good man. I am crying because I got to spend 45 years with my best friend." "He was lucky to have you too," Charlotte said. Annalise smiled through her tears. "We were lucky to have each other. Not everyone gets what we had. I know women who were married for 50 years and never knew what real love felt like. I had it for every single day of our marriage, and that is more than most people get in a lifetime." She lived for 5 more years after Vincent's death, years that were full of her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She told the story of how she and Vincent met to anyone who would listen, always emphasizing that it was never too late to start over, that courage and hope could overcome the darkest moments. On a warm evening in June, Annalise sat on her porch watching the sunset, thinking about Vincent and the life they had built together. She felt tired but content, ready for whatever came next. As the last rays of light faded from the sky, she closed her eyes and smiled. And when her daughter came to check on her an hour later, she had passed peacefully in her chair. They buried her beside Vincent in the Egar Cemetery, under a shared headstone that read simply, "Vincent and Annalise Steele, together in life and death." At her funeral, Clay told the story one more time of how his father had found his mother bearing her wedding ring in the desert, and how that moment had changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone they touched. "They taught us that love is a choice you make every day," he said. "That marriage is work but worth it. That family is everything. That you can overcome any hardship if you face it together. They left us an incredible legacy, and we honor them by living the way they did, with courage, with kindness, with hearts wide open to love." The Steele family continued to grow and thrive in the years that followed, carrying forward the lessons and values Vincent and Annalise had taught them. The house where Vincent and Annalise had raised their family remained in the family for generations, each new occupant aware of the love story that had played out within its walls. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the light is just right, people say you can see two figures on the porch sitting close together, watching the stars come out over Arizona. Whether it is memory or something more, the people of Egar like to think that Vincent and Annalise are still there, still together, still proving that true love never really dies. Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold until it took on the quality of legend. But for those who knew them, it was always more than just a story. It was proof that even in the harshest landscape, love can bloom, that the past does not have to define the future, that sometimes the end of one thing is just the beginning of something better, that a chance meeting on a desert road can change everything. And it all started with a woman burying her wedding ring, declaring her intention to bury the past with it, and a cowboy who heard her and decided to stop and help. From that simple act of kindness grew a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a legacy that continued long after they were gone. In the end, that is what mattered most. Not the hardships they faced or the obstacles they overcame, but the love they built together, brick by brick, day by day, year by year. A love that proved stronger than betrayal, deeper than grief, more enduring than time itself. A love that began in the desert dust and bloomed into something beautiful and lasting and true. The kind of love that makes a life worth living and a story worth telling and a legacy worth leaving behind.